Welcome to everyone. I'm James Jensen, today's webinar chair. I'm a contractor supporting the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs Tribal Energy Webinar Series. Today's webinar, titled Planning for a Changing Climate, is the first webinar of the 2021 DOE Tribal Energy Webinar Series. Let's go over some event details. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on DOE's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs website in about 1 week. Copies of today's presentation will be posted to the Office of Indian Energy's website shortly after the webinar, if not before, and I think we've actually already posted it and the link was sent out in the chat. You can find that. Everyone will receive a post-webinar email with the link to the pages where the slides and recording will be located. Because we are recording this webinar, all phones have been muted. We will answer your written questions at the end of the final presentation. You can submit a question at any time by clicking on the question button located in the webinar control box on your screen and typing your question. Unfortunately, Ms. Pierce, who usually provides the introduction on behalf of the Office of Indian Energy, is unable to join us today. Dr. Tommy Jones, the deployment specialist for DOE's Office of Indian Energy, will be providing the opening remarks. As the deployment specialist, Dr. Jones is responsible for assisting the deployment supervisor with implementing the office's deployment programs, which include technical assistance, financial assistance, and education and capacity building. Dr. Jones is from Jones, Oklahoma, and is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, Naknek Native Village, and a native shareholder of Bristol Bay Native Corporation of Alaska. He has extensive experience working with Alaska Native and American Indian tribes regarding governance, natural resources, and energy. Dr. Jones has conducted numerous in-depth research projects that have informed decision makers and has published works related to energy development in Indian country. Dr. Jones, also known as Tommy in our office, has a PhD in natural resources and American Indian studies from the University of Arizona. He holds certifications in administration and management of Native American natural resources, Native nation building, and is a project management professional. In 2016, he was honored as a recipient of NCAIED's prestigious Native American 40 Under 40 Award. Dr. Jones has worked for the Office of Indian Energy since 2014, first as a Sandia National Laboratories intern, then as a federal contractor, and now as a federal employee. Outside of work, he is a council member on the Colorado Cherokee Circle, which is a satellite community organization of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Tommy, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, James, and hello, everyone. I join James in welcoming you to today's webinar. This webinar series is sponsored by the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs, otherwise referred to as the Office of Indian Energy. The Office of Indian Energy promotes Indian energy development, efficiency, and use, helps to reduce or stabilize energy costs, works to enhance and strengthen Indian tribal energy and economic infrastructure relating to natural resource development and electrification, and to bring electrical power and service to Indian land and homes. To provide this assistance, our deployment program works with Indian tribes and organizations to help Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages overcome the barriers to energy development. Our deployment program is composed of a three-pronged approach consisting of financial assistance, technical assistance, and education and capacity building. This Tribal Energy webinar series is just one example of our education and capacity building efforts. Specifically, the webinar series is intended to provide attendees with information on tools and resources to develop and implement tribal energy plans, programs, and projects, highlight tribal energy case studies, and identify business strategies tribes can use to expand their energy options and develop sustainable local economies. This year's webinar series will focus on how tribal energy projects can improve community resilience, foster economic development, and support environmental stewardship. In this first webinar of the series, we will set the stage for the remainder of the series by discussing how climate change and extreme weather events are impacting tribal communities and identify opportunities and tools available to tribes to help plan for and adapt to these changes. We hope this webinar and the series as a whole is useful to you. We also welcome your feedback, so please let us know if there are ways we can make this series better. Before I turn it back to James, I want to personally thank the presenters for giving of their time and preparing for and presenting on today's webinar. Thank you all. We appreciate it. And with that, the virtual floor is yours, James.
Thank you, Tommy. Before we get to the presentations, I will introduce all of today's presenters. For our first presentation, we will hear from Luann Dahlman. Luann is a contractor to NOAA's Climate Programs Office. She serves as a co-managing editor of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit and product manager for the Climate Explorer tool. She works with subject matter and regional experts to provide information, data, and tools to help communities confront their climate-related vulnerabilities and reduce their risks related to extreme weather hazards. Luann has also worked as a high school science teacher, professional development workshop leader, and STEM curriculum developer. Following Luann, we will hear from Rachel Novak, acting coordinator of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Tribal Climate Resilience Program, where she also serves as the climate science coordinator. Rachel is Navajo. Her first clan is Gap of the Rock clan, and her maternal grandfather's clan is Towering House clan. At BIA, she leads efforts to support tribal climate resilience, including the annual competitive funding opportunity for tribal adaptation planning, and as federal coordinating lead author of the Tribes and Indigenous Peoples chapter of the 4th National Climate Assessment. She happily resides in Albuquerque, New Mexico with her husband and 2 young sons. Our final presentation will be from Nikki Cooley. Nikki is co-manager of the Institute for Tribal Energy Professionals Tribes and Climate Change program, whose goal is to strengthen tribal capacity and sovereignty in environmental and natural resource management through culturally relevant education, research, partnerships, and policy-based services. Nikki works with tribes across the continental U.S. and Alaska on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience planning with tribes and indigenous partners and various federal, nonprofit, academic, and community partners. Thanks to each of our presenters for making the time to join us today. With that, let's get started with our first presentation. Luann, you may proceed once your slides are up.
All righty. Thank you, James and Tommy and everyone for the organization of this. I'm happy to be here today. I'm Luann Dahlman. I'm calling in today from Western Minnesota on the land of the Yankton people. Acknowledge that they were here and have made the place that we have. The next slide, please. From the record-breaking number of billion-dollar disasters last year across the United States to changes in the timing of snowmelt and spring flooding, a lot of us are very aware that the climate is changing, and the frequency and severity of weather events within it are changing as well. If you're eager to learn more about climate science, I encourage you to visit our sister site, which is climate.gov. They cover climate science and current impacts, El Niños, lots of things that are going on in the climate. The site I'm going to speak about today, though, is the Climate Resilience Toolkit. It's a federal website that acknowledges climate is changing, and it provides resources to help people adjust to new conditions. We're going to spend some time today on the left there, learn about the steps to resilience, and also on the right, check conditions projected for the future. Next slide. So we'll start with the most common question we get, and that is, what is resilience? And it's essentially referring to the ability of a system to avoid or recover from a disruption. The graph on the left shows on the y-axis functional capacity, how well a system is doing. Let's consider just a community. And if business as usual is going on over time, the line extends straight to the right. However, let's say an acute hazard occurs, something like a big flood so big it takes out a bridge. The functional capacity of the community drops down below that tipping point when it loses the bridge. And even though it recovers over time, it might experience a permanent loss because it no longer has the bridge. So it's not as resilient as the example on the right. In this case, the functional capacity is moving along, but someone recognizes that the bridge is perhaps vulnerable to something, and they make some investments to build that resilience. They extend the bridge abutments or make it stronger. Then, when an acute hazard occurs, the functional capacity drops, but not as low as a tipping point. And eventually, they're resilient because they can recover to the previous level of functionality. So this is just a diagram to describe that. Let's go ahead to the next slide. We provide information across a range of categories. For each of these, we recruited experts among the federal agencies and used vetted information, usually things like the National Climate Assessment, to produce information. On the left, the last one there, tribal nations is one, and on the right, energy, both are somewhat relevant to this group. I do want to acknowledge Margaret Herzog, formerly of the BIA, was our key contact, and she worked with people across the country to develop case studies and ensure that we are working well with our tribal nations. Next slide. Once you select one of the topics, you'll see that we have developed narratives, short, popular style reading about each topic. And we give the key points about climate and reasons that people will need to adapt to new conditions. On the right, in that box under Browse Topics, you'll see under Tribal Nations, there are several subtopics: assessment and planning, adaptation, mitigation, disaster risk reduction, relocation, and capacity building. Those are also narratives that we have information about. So next slide. Have we moved to the next slide? Oh, there we go. So on the topic and regional narrative pages, you'll see that it's user-friendly information. There are illustrations, there are links for exploring things depending on your location and your stage of resilience building. We've used vetted information, so it's authoritative, but it's a bit less academic than the National Climate Assessment or the IPCC report. Next slide shows you why it's called a toolkit. All of the tools we have are digital tools. They are checklists and worksheets and guidebooks and websites and data locators and things like that people can use to gather data about climate or other things that they need to know in building resilience. Next slide. And we've produced more than 100 case studies to help people see what others are doing to confront their climate hazards. As a matter of fact, the map there on the lower left shows locations of the 28 tribal nations case studies that we already have in the toolkit. And then these are just examples of some of them that we have. We like to remind people that achieving resilience in a changing climate is a continual task. So as a consequence, most of the case studies are about people taking a single step toward resilience, sometimes as small as recognizing the hazards that they need to be aware of, other times going all the way to doing something to make their community more resilient. Next slide, please. What we'll do now is have a short tour of the steps to resilience. It's really a framework that people can use rather than just say, well, we got to worry about climate. This helps people walk through it step by step. And it's centered around things you care about. The weather and climate related hazards that could damage them. So I do want to point out each step has a short clear video, usually 2 to 3 minutes. And so investing the 15 minutes it takes to watch each of those videos is not a bad choice. But in step one, I want to reiterate, it's not just a learn about climate science and how the world is expected to change. Instead, it starts with the things you care about, your assets, and asks you to figure out if they could be damaged by weather or climate events. Next slide, please. Specifically, if you make a detailed list of your assets, the things you care about, and not just physical things, but the things that people do, the things that you would miss if we're no longer available in your community. And then you figure out by pairing them with the hazards that could occur to figure out what could happen to the things you care about. It gives you a deeper understanding of these hazards. This step also points out the importance of building and working with an inclusive team that has representation from all parts of your community. The groups that have been successful in implementing resilience building projects are also, they're led by a local champion who knows how to get things done within their local government. So this really sets you up to start with the things you care about. Next slide, please. The Explore Hazards page suggests questions that you should know the answer to and gives links directly to tools to help you find out about the potential hazards in your location. Next slide, please. Step two, we turn to focus on the things you care about. And that really asks, which of them are truly in danger? Next slide, please. For instance, if a flood occurred in this location, which building is more likely to lose its functional capacity? You can see Doris's on the left. They probably have cooking equipment and serving materials and things like that all at the bottom floor. But the building on the right, everything's been lifted a floor. So they would not respond equally to a flood. Doris's may never come back to its original functional capacity. So you might know at a gut level, just looking at this, which of these is more vulnerable. But the framework helps you go through a comprehensive list of your assets in a methodical manner that helps you ensure that you've considered all parts of your community. Note that it's very common for groups to hire a climate adaptation consultant or professional architecture and engineering firm at this stage to conduct vulnerability and climate assessments or risk assessments. However, the steps can help you walk through it too. Next slide, please. When you get to step three, it's important to brainstorm, come up with all the ideas that could increase your resilience, all the way from physical projects to education projects that help people do something different. This is the time to check case studies to see what other communities have done. Next slide. And the steps present some new concepts and vocabulary surrounding risk management that help people recognize all the ways they can reduce their vulnerability and risk. Next slide, please. We seem to have skipped one, but that's okay. So go back one, please. Thank you. On step 4, prioritize and plan. This is where you have a lot of things on the table, but you can't do them all, and you can't do them all at once. So you have to decide which are most important and in which order is good. And as you use your vulnerability and risk assessments at this time, this helps you apply for grants and raise funds. For instance, if you're going to apply for a FEMA grant, one of their new BRIC grants, you'll need to have documents such as a vulnerability and risk assessment ready to present to them. Next slide, please. One way to decide which of all the options you're going to start with is just to have your stakeholders do a traffic light voting. Everybody gets to say green, yellow, or red on each project. And if you can identify some options that are all green, that's the one you start with. Next slide. So finally, you start implementing progress, but it doesn't mean you're done. You continually go back to step one. As climate changes and risks change and your community changes, you've got to revisit. I put annually as a good suggestion here. We also want to encourage people, if you work through the steps to resilience, consider contributing your story as a case study to the Climate Resilience Toolkit. We're happy to work with you on things like that. So we're going to actually go back to a step one tool now. Going back to the homepage of the Climate Resilience Toolkit, and I've highlighted the check conditions projected for the future here. This is what we, when you're exploring hazards, you also want to be aware of what future conditions your community may face and what hazards that may introduce. So next slide. When you click that, you'll see the Climate Explorer with a little introduction and a sample graph. And then on the right, I want to point this out. After I do this demo and you're alone and I'm not here to answer questions, the second button, Access an Introductory Version of the Tool, will help you get started. I'm going to go through the tool itself, but that's there as a resource after this session is over. So next slide, please. The tool looks like this, and to get started, all you do is enter a county, city, or zip code. It offers information at the county scale level for every place in the contiguous United States, and we recently added boroughs in Alaska, and within the next, I'm hoping 6 or 8 weeks, we'll also have them for Hawaii and island territories. So it'll be the US Climate Explorer at that time. So next slide, please. Here are the options for the location that you entered. I used Phoenix as the option there. And we're going to focus just on the climate charts in the top center, but I encourage everyone to explore other portions of the Climate Explorer on your own time. So next slide. When you first see a graph, it's like, yeah, I know about graphs and all, and it's maybe a little complex. One of the first things I encourage people to do is take a look at every button. Look at what you're looking at, check the axes, make sure you're knowing what it's showing you. But for instance, okay, this is the daily maximum temperatures from 1950 to 2100. And the red range shows for higher emissions, the blue is for lower emissions. Go ahead, click the next button. The good news is About the Graph is right there. So if I wasn't there to tell you that, you can go to About the Graph, and next slide, please. You'll find that we try to give detailed descriptions of each element in the graph. So you can go back and forth to that at any time. And the bottom portion shows that there are a lot of climate models represented. Instead of showing the spaghetti that it makes to show every single climate model, we've simply shown it as an envelope of projections. So next slide, please. The buttons at the bottom here, the legend buttons, will actually turn on and off different portions of the graph. You can see that, for instance, I've turned on this, in this case, the historical observed. This shows the actual observations, the dark gray bars, and you'll see that they all fall within the modeled range of temperatures for that time. And essentially, this is what gives climate modelers confidence that their projections for the future will also fall within the ranges that they've indicated. Next slide, please. You can also turn off one of the scenarios if you only want to focus on high emissions. You ask yourself, do you think humans will get it together and control our release of heat trapping gases, or will they just continue to increase? And you can decide which scenario to look at. Next slide. I'm really excited about this. It seems like every graph in the world that you look at, especially through the COVID times, have a very handy dandy readout of the values. And again, within 6 to 8 weeks, maybe many of you know how slowly the government works, but we expect to roll out this feature so you can read directly off the graph and interpret these graphs a little bit more easily. I will also point out, next slide, that you could look at this information as a map. You can, in this case, it's comparing historical conditions with higher emissions conditions in the 2070s. So next slide. The tool doesn't just show maximum temperature. In fact, there are 20 variables, and you can see the description for each just by hovering over those question marks. So this one is one that people really seem to understand well, days per year with maximum temperature above 100 degrees. That is kind of, people get a feel for that, I think. Next slide. And that's the graph showing the number of days over 100 degrees. And here it is, next slide. I've just added some annotation to make it more meaningful. And you can learn to read these graphs just as easily. But from 1960 to 1991, the historical period, the average of 80 days per year over 100 degrees, compared with, by the end of this century, the range is from 110 to 200 days per year over 100 degrees. So, and you can make these annotations for any of these graphs, and it also is going to be very helpful when you have those readouts. So just to show other variables that we have, projections for the number of days when the low temperature will fall to freezing or lower. That already doesn't happen very often in the Phoenix area, but it's going to be even less. And then the next slide. I want to point out, we do offer the LOCA projections for precipitation, but the fact of the matter is climate models simply aren't as good with precipitation as they are with temperature. So the projections overlap one another almost completely for lower and higher emissions in the future, but you can get some data about precipitation. Next slide, please. So finally, we just looked at climate charts there in the center. I did show you one map, but if you have the chance to put your own location in and go to these and see the other information that you can find, you'll see that we've tried to help people explore hazards in the future as well as now. Next slide, please. I appreciate your attention, and I will look forward to answering any questions after the other two presenters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luann. An excellent presentation and a very cool tool. Our next presentation will be from Rachel Novak. Rachel, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Luann, for that presentation. I'd like to pick it up here and talk about our program at the BIA Tribal Climate Resilience program and provide an overview of that to hopefully give an idea of some of the tools and resources that are available to help with some of the related activities that Luann mentioned. So first, let me, I do want to acknowledge my team and also do a short introduction as I was taught. So yat e Rachel Novak inishe to discussion din initially bilagana bashich in can ani dashiche something additionally. I just wanted to establish potential relationship there with introducing myself, and I also want to acknowledge where I am. Today I'm speaking to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this area is the homeland of several pueblos, including the Sandia, Laguna, and Isleta. And I'm happy to look outside from where I am and even see our southern sacred mountain of our tribe, Tzotzil, just to the west here as well. Our team is small, but we have a big heart. It is myself, Lisa Samoy, Corwin Carroll, and we recently had an addition of Coral Avery. So we're a small program, but we do try to get a lot done and use the resources we have very efficiently to help Indian country and Alaska Native villages. Okay, next slide, thanks. All right, this is, I updated this slightly, but basically today I'll go through the purpose of our program, talk about our awards program, some of the resources we have available like training and technical support and a few other helpful resources. And then I will conclude so we can move to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about our purpose. Our core mission is to serve the 574 federally recognized tribes across the US. And we do this through empowering federally recognized tribes and BIA trust managers to achieve long-term program goals by mainstreaming climate considerations that put BIA and tribal resources at risk. So the idea is that when tribes can enable, the idea is that this can enable tribes to identify strategies that can help address these risks and improve outcomes, including those that affect natural resources, tribal economies, infrastructure, public safety, and human health. And we do this through leadership engagement, delivery of data and tools, tribal capacity building, and coordination with our federal partners to help improve our planning and management. So we really invest on the planning side and not as much with the implementation. And the idea is that if tribal programs can incorporate these risks onto the planning side and training and get the data and information needed, that those risks can be integrated into the existing programs through their planning and their functions and related decision making. So that can help with implementation later through the existing program. So we really focus on the planning side. So here are our general focus areas. Of course, we really support climate adaptation planning, but we also have an area of our program that supports management, relocation, and managed retreat and protect in place planning for tribes in coastal areas or in riverine communities near rivers as well that could experience some impacts that way. And we also have an area of the program that supports ocean and coastal management and planning, and that does include Great Lakes tribes. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our awards program now. So these are just two graphs of the overall basic statistics from our awards program from the last 2 years. We do have a solicitation out right now, and the deadline is actually today for that. But we do have this program annually, so if you didn't hear about it before today, we will have a program next year. So so hopefully we can just get the word out. Oh, sorry, can you go back really quick? Since 2011, we have given out over 703 awards, and cumulatively that comes to over $60 million that goes out to help Indian countries and Alaska Native villages. We do have an annual awards budget we have in the past of $8 to $15 million, and that just depends on what Congress appropriates. And up here in the y-axis on the horizontal, we have kind of the sum of each region, and these go by the 12 BIA regions. And so you can see the regions that have a lot of applications and also have received a lot of awards up here. You can see we do have get a good representation from Alaska Native villages and also from the Pacific Northwest and our Pacific region as well. This is mostly reflective of the number of applications we get from these regions. So, but this is generally what things have looked like the last few years. But every year can be different. And again, our funds are just based on our annual appropriations from Congress. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the categories of funding for our awards program since it's such a big part of our program. So we have these general areas here kind of in the dark brown, the climate adaptation planning, the ocean and coastal management and planning, the capacity building, that is to develop a category 2 proposal up here, and then our relocation, manage, retreat, and protect in place planning category. And then this year, we're really happy to reinvigorate our internships and youth engagement categories of funding. And so I'll highlight a couple things here because there is such a diversity of capacity across Indian country and Alaska Native villages. A few years ago, we developed this capacity building category of funding because our very popular category of funding is the category 2 up there for adaptation planning. And we heard feedback from many tribes that you know, there wasn't kind of a stepping stone or help for tribes who didn't have as much capacity, couldn't necessarily bring on grant writers, you know, and so we're having trouble with this very competitive category of funding. And so we developed this capacity building category that's just for tribes who have not received one of the larger awards from our program before. And it really helps with setting up first a risk scoping exercise that could really help better situate the tribe to provide a more competitive category 2 application. And then the category 7 down below that, relocation, manage, retreat, and protect in place management and planning, that was also a new category of funding because we realized we started to get many applications from tribes who were facing these very urgent and dire questions relating to whether or not, you know, the erosion and flooding and permafrost melt were to the point where they might need to start thinking about decisions related to relocation or managed retreat of some of their infrastructure, or, you know, and how to protect in place in the meantime. And so we developed this category of funding as well for that purpose. And again, it's not just for coastal communities, because we know that a lot of communities near rivers or have lands or infrastructure or cultural resources near rivers that are experiencing more flooding are experiencing more risk now as well. And I want to mention on our ocean and coastal management planning categories, categories 4 and 5, that these don't have to be related to climate change. These could be related, you know, to marine spatial planning, cooperative, you know, regional marine management. And so that makes it a little bit different than the rest of these, but we do for this category have a $2 million crosscut every year that's devoted to these 2 categories. Yeah, so that's a little bit of a background of some of our categories of funding that I wanted to point out. So we'll go to the next slide. So again, our solicitation, our program really is open to and focused on federally recognized tribes and tribal organizations that serve federally recognized tribes. And right now we have this solicitation that is open, and it actually closes today. We did extend it because of a few technical issues that we were encountering with the new system, but it is closing today at 5 o'clock Alaska time. And we do anticipate having another one next year if you missed it this year. And yeah, and we know that a lot of things require partnerships, and so we do allow, of course, for other entities to participate as subgrantees. Next slide. So you can find more information in 2 places. You could go to grants.gov, or you could go to our BIA Tribal Climate Resilience site homepage. And that's just a snippet, basically, a screenshot of what you can see there. We have the solicitation there, some additional optional application forms that can help streamline the process, some FAQs for questions that we get, yeah, many every year probably, where we've archived those. And so that's where you can find more information. All right, so I'm gonna go to I'm gonna move now kind of to some resources that we have aside from the financial assistance. So we work a lot with the Northern Arizona University's Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, our ITEP, their climate change program. And Nikki Cooley, a colleague from that program who will be speaking after me. So I won't go too much into all of the great work that they do, but they're a very important training partner for us. And so we cooperate with them to help host these workshops. So there's a 101 training, like a climate change 101 training, an advanced climate change cohort that started in 2019 that kind of takes a deeper dive than just those 101 trainings into specific kind of sectorally focused programs. And this past year, we were really excited to work with ITEP to host the biennial virtual National Tribal Climate and Indigenous, or National Tribal Indigenous Climate Conference. And this past year, it was virtual because of COVID, of course. But we do hope to have that in 2022 in person, or yes, 2022. So keep an eye out there, get on their email list to keep apprised of all the different opportunities for capacity building through training and in collaboration and meeting other tribes as well. All right, so I'm going to move over to technical support and reports and things like that that could be helpful. So we have a partnership with the DOI Climate Adaptation Science Centers, and for those that are unfamiliar, it is a partnership-driven program, and it teams scientific researchers with natural and cultural resource managers and local communities. And the focus is really on fish, wildlife, waters, and lands across the country, so kind of more the natural resource side. And here is a link to their page where you can learn more. There are, I believe, 7-8 regions across the country that each have a regional climate adaptation science center, or CASC, and you can go to the page in your region and get a better feel for all the great work that they're doing. But they're really important partners, and I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about some of the great work that we've done to really try to expand their resources and expertise, technical expertise at these CASC centers through our Tribal Climate Resilience Liaison Partnership. So hopefully some of you, or many of you, are familiar with the liaison in your region, but we work with the CASC and several tribal organizations in a partnership to basically stand up this network of tribal climate resilience liaisons. And I'll go through and the next slide, and we'll go from the east to the west. So Casey Thornborough is the Tribal Climate Resilience Liaison for the Northeast and the Southeast regions. He is an employee of the United Southern and Eastern Tribes, or USET, and he's excellent. If you're in those regions, please feel free to reach out to him or any of the liaisons in your region. They're all really excellent resources and can help connect you to the really excellent resources at the CASC at your region, or other federal partners in your region too that might have expertise that could be relevant, because they are connected to a lot of the other federal programs like the USDA Climate Hubs, the NOAA RESAs, et cetera. So they're a really great starting point if you're wondering about available resources in the region. Okay, next slide. All right, and if you are in the Midwest, Sarah Smith is the liaison there, and she works for the College of Menominee Nation. And this is a new region actually for the CASC, so they are standing that up. So they're trying to find, they did a recent call for proposals for the host university to host that CASC in the Northwest, or in the Midwest. So yeah, hopefully in another month or two, we'll know who the actual university is that is partnering to host that DOI CASC. But that is Sarah Smith. Okay. In the South Central region, we have April Taylor, and she is an employee and a member of the Chickasaw, or citizen of the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma. And she is the longest serving tribal liaison. Her position is really what a lot of the other positions were kind of modeled on. So she's been serving in that position for a long time, and it's a really excellent resource as well. Next slide. Right in the North Central, we have Stephen Tangen, and he's a contractor with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. And he, again, is a really excellent resource. He's located in Boulder, Colorado, but he serves our whole north central region as well. Next slide. All right, for the Southwest, we have Althea Walker, and she is a employee of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC. And so AHEC is, they work with all of the tribal colleges across the US. And so she's actually a really good connecting point for resources there potentially as well. As a Southwest, she can probably help connect you if you have questions about climate and the TCU network. And so that is Althea, and she's in the Southwest. All right. And Chaz Jones is our Northwest Tribal Climate Resilience Liaison. He's an employee of the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, or ATNI. And yeah, he's in the Northwest. All right, and our last liaison, the far west, is Melinda Chase, and she is the Alaska liaison, and she is an employee of the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, or APIA. But again, she serves the entire region, which is the entire state of Alaska, and has a lot on her plate with the 229 federally recognized tribes. So they're all really excellent. Feel free to reach out to them and get on if they have a mailing list serve or can help you with other resources, then they'd be happy to. Okay, I'm going to turn over to some of the other resources that we have developed at the BIH Tribal Climate Resilience Program. So in 2018, the 4th National Climate Assessment was released, and as part of that development, we worked with partners to develop the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Actions Map. And this is the URL that you can find that at. Right now, there's over 1,100 entries across the US. And this includes more than just federally recognized tribes, because we were trying to be very broad with the National Climate Assessment, and in terms of just focusing on all activities that we could find from Indigenous communities. And so this is a resource that is available. We have coded everything. You can see in the legend on the right there under planning or assessment, adaptation or implementation, monitoring or research, governance or capacity building, and youth and cultural continuity, with these different icons and their different colors. And you can turn on different layers there, but that's helpful. We hope for folks that are wondering, what others have done or are doing in their region or nationally. So do be aware of that resource. Okay, a couple other resources that can be real helpful are the University of Oregon's Tribal Climate Change Guide. This is a really wonderful resource. You can see all the different tabs that they have up here. If you're looking for funding sources, they do try to update this pretty regularly, so it can really help there, so you don't have to necessarily go to, a dozen different federal sites that can kind of take you there. They also have a really great list of publicly available tribal adaptation plans and many other resources there. And the link to that is down on the lower left. If you go to our website, you can also see the award summaries that we have from previous years. We hope to get the 2021 funding award summary up this fall once we've done all of the awarding there. And you can see basically kind of the totals for each year and the totals by category. And there's a little couple sentences basically about each of the funded projects too. So that those can be really helpful resources to see what others have been doing.
Are you there?
Hello? Okay. All right, next slide. Okay. And I mentioned earlier the National Climate Assessment. The 4th National Climate Assessment included Chapter 15 on tribes and Indigenous peoples. And the regional chapters of that assessment also had key messages and Indigenous focused content as well. So that's a really wonderful resource. As Luann mentioned, it can maybe feel a little bit more academic than the than the Climate Resilience Toolkit, but it's a really great resource and it's also authoritative. So check out the region that you're from, and you know, there's really great content in each of those regional chapters. This national chapter, chapter 15, is concise. You could probably read it in 20 minutes. It's less than 10 pages, and so that can be really helpful from a national perspective, but do be aware that there's those regional chapters as well. And the 5th National Climate Assessment is kind of in its early stages of getting started as well. So the information, this is the 4th National Climate Assessment is the most up-to-date assessment, but there's content in previous assessments, and do be aware that the 5th National Climate Assessment is underway in early stages as well. So we hope to be able to promote that when it's complete. Next slide. Okay, so another resource we have is from the Tribal Resilience Resource Guide. There are regional fact sheets, and when I say region, I mean we organize these by the 12 BIA regions. So there's information you can find and links to services, products, funding sources, tools, training, examples, and regional groups for potential partnerships. And also federal national sites, and then the regional site that corresponds to that region. So those fact sheets are available at the Tribal Resilience Resource Guide, and I believe the link's at the very end. Okay, next slide. Okay, and we also have in the Tribal Resilience Resource Guide pages for every federally recognized tribe. This hasn't been updated since 2017. We're in the process of trying to figure out next steps for that. I know I realize there have been several tribes who have recently received recognition, but we don't have pages for tribes from after 2016, which was the last update. So we are working on some technical issues there to try to get that updated, but do be aware that these exist and can be helpful places to get some information as well. And there's definitely links to like the Climate Resilience Toolkit, Climate Explorer, etc. And you can see a list of awards from the tribes who've received. And this just goes to the award summary. So it's just kind of a brief couple sentences on awards if the tribe has received any from 2016 or before. Okay, next slide. All right, in closing, I just wanted to provide a link to some of those resources that I mentioned, our homepage for our program, the Tribal Resilience Resource Guide, ITEP's page there. You can sign up for the newsletter. Nikki will probably have that as well. Again, the University of Oregon's Tribal Climate Change Guide, which is a really excellent resource. And then I didn't talk too much about this, but there are cooperative ecosystem studies units. They can be really helpful in finding partnerships if you're looking for technical resources for different opportunities, you know, federal or not. But there's some potential connections there as well. And with that, I want to thank you, Nikki, for our partners over at the Department of Energy's Indian Energy Office, and for my co-presenters as well. You can email myself or Elisa as well from our program if you have further questions, and we'd be happy to talk with you. Okay, Nikki.
Thanks so much, Rachel. What a excellent program, just a ton of information there. So a lot of catching up to do if someone's getting up to speed on what's available, but that's wonderful. All right, for our last presentation, we have Nikki Cooley talking about the ITEP's climate change program. Go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you, James. I appreciate it. Before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to introduce myself in my traditional way. Yat Nikki Cooley in the Shia, Kenya Ani Nishlingo look at the Nebashichin. Is it Lana Edashin le Trohe Dline Edashiche? I could away the net son in the Shle. I'm of the Towering House clan, born for the Reed People clan. Maternal grandparents are of the Water That Flows Together clan. Paternal grandparents are from the Many Goats clan. I come from Shanto and Blue Gap, Arizona. I work in Flagstaff, Arizona, the traditional homelands of my people, along with 13 other tribes, including the Havasu, Havasupai, the Wallapai, Paiute, Hopi, and many more. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about giving some examples about climate change impacts on tribal indigenous communities. And I'll tell you a little bit about ITEP first. So on the next slide, it shows you how long we have been in existence. So the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals as a whole is an institute that houses other programs such as the Tribal Pesticides Program, National Tribal Water Council, and the Air Association. Also, the Waste and Water Response Program, Environmental Education Outreach. I'm forgetting somebody, but the Climate Change Program originated, actually air quality. I cannot forget the air quality program, indoor and outdoor air quality program that ITEP houses. So out of actually that program, we got some funding prior to 2009 to do a little bit of climate change trainings, and then we received some funding when that allowed the program to start in 2009. Since 2009, the program really has assisted tribes across the country in addressing and learning about climate change impacts on their communities and other communities, but also what types of resources are available. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that because my granddaughter Rachel already mentioned a little bit about what we do. Specifically, we're known for our in-person trainings, which are virtual now, the Introduction to Climate Change Adaptation Planning trainings. We're actually going to host one with the Blue Lake Rancheria, Southwest and Northwest Climate Tribal liaisons, Chaz and Althea. So our program actually works heavily and very closely with the tribal liaisons, the BI tribal liaisons, to conduct these courses and even our webinars that we have. But we also partner with tribes individually to work on an adaptation plan if they should ask us for help. So one of the examples is that we did assist in the past the Yurok tribe of Northern California, the Gila River Indian community on their adaptation plans. But we also do a number of outreach and communication, which is what I like to do. I like to talk. Well, I don't really like to talk, but I do like to talk about what my job is. And I love my job. I love working with people. So we do a lot of webinars, phone calls. We do a lot of work groups, small and large. We are primarily grant funded. We're located at a university, but most of our funds come from our partnerships with tribes or other organizations. But and in large part, the climate change program is funded through a cooperative agreement with the BIA's Tribal Climate Resilience Program. So we're very fortunate to be partners with them on a lot of the programs. And then on the next slide, I want to show you my team. I couldn't do this alone without these folks. Karen Cazzetto, Dr. Karen Cazzetto is based in Boulder, Colorado, who is my co-manager, and Anne Marie Chichili is our executive director. Dara Marks Marino is our senior research specialist. Kelsey Morales is also our community program coordinator. We also have Colleen Cooley and Laureen Lewis who help us out with a lot of stuff. But we also are so lucky to work closely with Julie Maldonado, who works as one of our facilitators and collaborators. So if you don't know these people, you should get to know them because they're a really great team of folks. So we're all based in Flagstaff, California, and Colorado, and actually Colleen works on the res. So and on the next slide, I'm going to show you who our advisory committee is, because it's not just me and Karen sitting in an office that says, hey, this is what tribes should learn about. This is what we should do for tribes. Instead, we work with the advisory committee members, which include tribal representatives, and we try to have them from the different regions. And so you see a list of folks up there who are so integral in advising ITEP's climate work. But we also work with federal agency reps from the EPA, the Forest Service, BIA, and NIAX, and I think Paul Wagner, I forgot to change it. I think he works with a university, Virginia Tech. So I got to change that. But we also, as Rachel previously showed, the tribal resilience liaisons, we work with all of them very heavily also, because they work in their regions. They know, all of these folks know best what's going on the ground. So we do ask them for their knowledge. And in turn, we also work heavily with them. We just got done working on the Southwest Adaptation Forum and the Shifting Seasons Summits with a couple of our liaisons. So we're so happy that we have a great list. And I also want to mention BIA is also on there. We work closely with Elisa and Rachel on that. So on the next slides, I want to show you, next couple of slides, I want to show you the impacts. I really don't have to show you so many pictures of the impacts that are happening in your community. You can probably identify with a lot of the pictures that you see on the screen. You know, there's coastal storm surges, there's wildfires, our indigenous foods are at risk, our waters, our trees and our plants are at risk. And on the next slide, our animal relatives, our non-human relatives, are also being heavily impacted, because if they don't spawn due to warming waters, or if the moose or other big game migrate more up north where there's better food and it's a lot cooler, then we have our relative, the mosquito or the ticks, that are more prevalent and can carry these diseases to our areas. And also a lot of you've been hearing about the Newtok and the Catalina communities up in Alaska that are really feeling the impacts of storm or the sea level rise, but they're not the only two. There's a lot of communities, our coastal communities, that are experiencing that impact. Down in the left corner is a good picture of the sand dune migration that is still occurring on the Navajo reservation, and maybe other communities in the Southwest, where you're thinking, what really does happen with a sand dune? What's the big deal? Well, they actually block a lot of roadways for our rural community members, including grandma and grandpa, who may only have one vehicle that carries them to and from emergency services, to town to get food, and they don't have a bulldozer to help them clear the pathway. So that's one of the things that's happening. And wildfire, it's happening everywhere. And unfortunately, every summer now is fire season, like a severe fire season. As a former wildland firefighter, I worked on an engine crew, and my season ended right after monsoons came in early August, or maybe like in June, but now it's expected to last a lot longer. And we're experiencing droughts everywhere. We're experiencing impacts to our water quality and whatnot. So I'm going to give you examples of the types of things, the impacts to different tribes. And I really wanted to show you the adaptation plans that they have, or mitigation plans that they have, and kind of just really listing the impacts that they have highlighted in their plans. And I want you to know that these adaptation plans, mitigation plans, are really important to indigenous tribal communities, because it gives them a louder voice to say, hey, this is what is happening in our community. Even though we are sovereign nations within state boundaries, we are also impacting it, being impacted in ways communities off reservations are not experiencing. So the first one you see on your screen, of course, is my people. The Navajo Nation came out with a climate adaptation plan and was approved by council in 2018. And what they actually did was work with the community, including their whole division of natural resources. the different division heads or the department heads, and then they worked with the community land or grazing officers. Each community, there's 110 of them on the Navajo Nation, 110. Imagine trying to meet with all of them. So they worked with the regional representatives, and then some community members were also welcome when there was these events in the different regions of the Navajo Nation. It's not an easy job to do, but what these the list you see here is really the things that kept coming up the most. Water. Yes, we are experiencing a severe drought. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at their lowest levels. The Colorado River is at its lowest level than it has been. So I feel like we're going to set records every year because of climate change. And also feral horses. That is a big problem on the reservation because, as you see on the screen, there's not enough enforcement or compliance capacity there. But the communication also really isn't up to standards where people can communicate and also act and come together to address these issues. I mean, my sister and I have to go to the top of the hill just to get a signal on our telephone. Wait, they don't have telephones anymore. I meant cell phones, excuse me. Just to get a connection, and then we have to go 15 miles down the road to even get internet service at the local gas station. So this is a reality for a lot of tribes across the country that are in areas that aren't developed in terms of their infrastructure to help them communicate. But also, you know, there's pollution, there's air quality, and illegal dumping. That is prevalent on our reservation for sure. We don't have, what is that big company that hauls your trash away once a week? We don't have companies like that. So they're trying really hard to find places in these 110 communities where people can haul their trash and their recycling, and that in itself is a lot of work. But also grazing management. A lot of our people are really dependent on livestock. Sheep is life. We have my family has had to downsize their sheep and goats and their livestock heavily because there just isn't enough water, there isn't enough plants to really address to feed them and whatnot. So that in turn impacts our ways of life, and I'll talk about that later on. And so then I'm going to shift to California, where we have the La Jolla Band of Los Sueños Indians. Their adaptation plan came out in 2019, and they worked with the Climate Science Alliance on this. Really, I thought it was a very unique plan because they address it as a living document, and that's something at ITEP in our climate trainings. We say this is something that should not be written and then forgotten, because as a people we have that philosophy that everything is living, everything has a breath and has and so what we do to it has consequences. And so I really appreciate that for about this adaptation plan. La Jolla is they're located in Southern California on the coast. And they're a smaller tribe, but they're one of the rising leaders in addressing climate change, and how they did their adaptation plan is actually really beautiful. So if you look at their plan, they covered natural and cultural resources and how it affected these resources, but also how it affected the human health and wellness of their people. Because again, they're in Southern California, they're undergoing a severe drought and have been for a while. Wildfire is prevalent, definitely. That's been in the news the past few years, and also these severe storms that have come, and also the heat. I had a colleague who told me, I mean, she lives near the La Jolla, and she did say to me one time that the schools where her kids go to have had to think about inserting what do you call those, air conditioners, but they've never needed it before. The classrooms were not built for that level of heat that they have been having, and so they have to take the kids outside so as not to affect their health while they're sitting in that classroom. The La Jolla you should also check out their drought mitigation plan. So they're really kind of moving forward with the plan. But yes, so on the next slide, I'm going to show you one of my favorite people in the whole world. Mike Durglow Jr. is leading the effort and has been leading the effort on the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe of the Flathead Reservation in Montana. And this plan was released in 2013. They're undergoing a massive updating of their plan, and so it may have come out. I don't think so. I know it's going to come out soon, but what they've really focused on are these topics you see here: forestry, wildfire, and air quality. I was up there probably like 3 years ago, and they were having these severe fires, lightning fires, and also human set fires near the Glacier National Park. And flying in, I could see these fires happening, and that was scary. But the scary thing was, for 3 days when I was hanging out with Mike and his people, that the air quality was seriously compromising my health. And I can't imagine folks with respiratory issues what they were feeling. I was blowing my nose and there was soot coming out, but also I was coughing heavily. And I think I'm I'm pretty healthy person. I don't have any issues. So that's one of the things that they're really concerned about for their elders and those who have respiratory issues. They're also addressing noxious weeds and the agricultural impacts to the land. There's a lot of livestock there, and so and also farming from the surrounding communities, not just within the reservation community members. How will that impact the land? How will it impact the plants that are that depend on good clean water? But also the habitat and the species of their aquatic family members, and also wildlife. There's more wetlands that are becoming drier. Their alpine and grassland ecosystems are severely at risk because of drier conditions, but also the water quantity. There's a lot of lakes up there. It's beautiful, and you would think there's plenty of water, but they're severely they're also going through a drought. And all of this, the people are concerned about how their culture is going to survive, because it's heavily tied to the trees, the plants, the water, and everything else. And they make that a big point of their adaptation plan, and how they will have these services and resources to provide to the people that are impacted by all of these. All right, the next slide shows you another tribe that I'm going to go to the northeast. The Shinnecock Indian Nation. This is an old plan that you see before you. They actually just went through an update. They worked with the Peconic Estuary Program, and that was released in September 2019. And that was a vulnerability assessment and action plan. We can provide that in the links, or I can send it to you all, or you can actually just Google it, Shinnecock Nation Vulnerability Assessment, and it will pop up. And so they're also these leaders that are really speaking loudly about what's happening. When we think of coastal erosion, coastal impacts, rising sea waters, we almost think about Alaska first, or our relatives down in Louisiana or the Northwest. But also the Shinnecock Nation is located near actually where the Hamptons are. That's their traditional homelands. The Hamptons, where all the really rich people hang out during celebrities, during the summer. That's their traditional homelands, and they're really concerned about rising sea waters, coastal wetland erosion that is also that has habitat to very important species for their foods and for their culture. They're experiencing severe storms. Their water quality is also being impacted. They're concerned about future shellfish harvests, but they're also concerned about rodents, pests, and vector diseases and whatnot. So they have a small community, and they're really moving towards addressing it. They have a small staff. So because they really want to also figure out how they can prevent the loss of culturally and spiritually significant lands and whatnot. So again, the Shinnecock Nation, Indian Nation up in the Northeast, and remember that the Shinnecock, they're known, I think their name translates to people of the stony shore and whatnot. So look to them to see what amazing things Siobhan and her crew are doing. So, and then on the next slide, I'm going to go to the Midwest, the Quapaw Nation of Oklahoma. Now, this is a hazard mitigation plan, but they're really addressing these impacts, and they're really concerned. We did a workshop with them last year before the pandemic shut down everything, and they're in Northeast Oklahoma, and they're really concerned about drought, but they're also really concerned about flooding, because they get these precipitation events that happen within, say, an hour, and then it doesn't rain for a long time, and whatnot. So these unpredictability in the amounts of rain they get is really of concern to them. And it's, if you've ever been to that part of Oklahoma, it's also really flat and whatnot, and they're concerned about flooding to homes, on all kinds of different infrastructure. They want to make sure that they are prepared in that event, in the event of emergencies. And then on the next slide, I'm going to go to north central Wisconsin, where the Lac du Flambeau tribe is located on the shores of Lake Superior. I believe that's where they're located. And they have a hazard mitigation plan that addresses, as you see on the screen, the usual things that we hear about, tornadoes, high winds, extreme heat and cold, dam failure, severe thunderstorms. What I thought was really unique about this plan is that they also include plant and animal epidemic, meaning, these invasive species that are overtaking the native plants that they use for their foods or for their ceremonies, and so on. But also they address the illegal drug crisis and school violence and armed attack. And I thought that was really unique, because you don't see that very often. And I thought to myself, why did they put that in there? Well, they put that in there because, all of these hazards or these impacts that you see up there require emergency personnel. So if one of these things happen, and it requires all of the emergency personnel to address that, and then all of a sudden, you have another emergency down the road, someone's overdosing on opioids, so you're and then more, you have all of those combined and happening even more, you're being stretched thin. So I thought that was really neat. And on the next slide, part of their plan, when I was reading it, I really did like what they said. For the tribe, natural resources are cultural resources. And I hope you have seen that as an overriding theme for the plans I've talked about so far, because as the tribe says, it's an integral part of what keeps their community together and also thrive and whatnot. So that, I thought that was a really neat quote I wanted to show y'all. Then I'm going to go to the Northwest, the Quinault Indian Reservation in Washington State. They're experiencing a lot. They're also a coastal tribe. They're experiencing more severe storms, way more flooding, and also earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, wildfire, and drought. They may not be happening at the same time, but they're preparing for that for it to happen someday. You never know with climate change going, and they have a plan where they're moving their most vulnerable infrastructure, you know, say like the preschool or the elder community center, to higher ground. So they're literally trying to find the monies and the capacity to move their community to higher ground. And I cannot imagine how scary that is to have to move, to know that you're going to have to move. The next slide, the last tribe I'm going to show you is the Oscarville Tribal Climate Adaptation Plan. And I was just so in love with this plan because it's one of the most beautiful ones I've read so far. They're a small community. They have a lot of threats, impacts, including rising river levels, coastal erosion due to a lot of things, but you know, the permafrost melt is happening. But you know, they also have to think about their community where they may not have adequate sanitation, and if you're having erosion and flooding, that can also impact that infrastructure. But also they talk a lot about actually food security and subsistence, you know, and whatnot and so on. But what I really liked about their plan is that they originally didn't have a word for resilience. And I thought that Luann gave a really good definition of what resilience means in the English way, in the Western way, but they actually came up with a word. I'm not going to say it, but it's in Yupik language, and they made it to where it translates to "we are resilient." They use a lot of their traditional artwork in there. They make a lot of references to the stories, the animals, but they also work heavily with the community. They use a lot of language from the community, the direct quotes from the community members of the observations of change that they have seen. So I thought this was really neat, a really neat plan, and I encourage you to check it out. So, and then on the next slide is also a really good visual of how you can explain climate change to people. And this is from the Caribou Management Board. And I thought, you know, if you ever want to explain climate change to communities, you don't have to have a whole slide deck of just words and graphs. I encourage you to use visuals. And so this one shows you, you know, the caribou who had to worry about the usual things. And then with the onset of the settlers, the industrial development, and the, you know, infrastructure development, the booming population, all of a sudden the caribou was under more stress. And then you bring in this climate change that's occurring even at a faster rate, and then it's like, where did the caribou go all of a sudden, right? They're all moving north where it's a lot cooler, and whatnot. And so on the next slide, I wanted to show you, you know, kind of just these words, I hope, that speak to what tribes, indigenous people really feel about the earth, and that we encourage them to convey in their adaptation mitigation plans, that their indigenous identity is equal. It's the same as the earth, the sky, the animals, the plants, and so on, where we are very much connected to the earth. It's not just something that's outside my home, but it's who we are. In the next slide, because it shows you, because there are ways of life, they're intertwined in our language. Rachel and I introduced ourselves in the Navajo way, and when we translated it, it was very much tied to the water, to the animals, and the plants, and the sky, the earth, and so on, because all of this plays heavily into our way of life, whether it's ceremonial, spiritual, it's you know, for food, for shelter, clothing, and so on. So I want to make that point that all these adaptation plans that I talked about, mitigation plans too, is that's what's heavily in their adaptation plans, in these documents. They're not just words and graphs and you know, those are great too. I'm actually a nerd and I love to read that kind of stuff, but tribes are more than that. So I wanted to show you the next slide, which shows you a mind map. I hope you're thinking, where can I find all this information? This is a mind map. If you go to our ITEP website, click on mind map, and this will pop up and show, and you can click on any one of those circles and it'll take you to resources that ITEP offers, but a lot of what our partners offer and whatnot. So, and that includes these adaptation plans, as you can see on the next slide, where I just show you screenshots of a few of the plans and vulnerability assessments that are out there. There's about 60 so far that we have found, not I, but we have found. And you can look on our website. It's included as part of our, on the next slide, the adaptation toolkit that ITEP offers. We also heavily is my favorite word this round, I guess, but we also recommend a lot of what the US Climate Resilience Toolkit does, because I think it's just wonderful. Their framework is similar to what ITEP came up with, because we came up with this toolkit specifically for tribes. When we started this program, there was really nothing for tribes to go on. I mean, there's a template in here for a tribal resolution. A tribal resolution is when you write this document and you get permission from your tribal council. But there's also, you're like, what does a adaptation template look like, a planning template look like? Well, it's in there, and you can just literally replace it with your information. And that's what Mike Durglow did with his first adaptation or strategic plan for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe. So we're really tribally, indigenously focused and whatnot. And last but not least, the last slide, Luann gave you a really great slide on the case studies of these stories of what tribes are doing, and we call it tribal profiles. Some of we go regionally. We're trying to really fill up the southeast and the northeast and whatnot, but you can click on any of these regions and look at the different stories, and I believe these are like a page or 2 pages. We try to make it short and sweet, where our colleague Dara Marks Marino, Julie Maldonado, and others, Kathy Lynn, they have written some of these tribal profiles. Some are also included on the tribal climate or the US Climate Resilience Toolkit and whatnot. So this will give you a snippet, a little insight to what tribes are doing, and you can read about it. One that we're working on that will come up soon is the oh my God, the Seminole Tribe of Florida. So we're working with them to, it's in the final approval stages of what's going on. So these case studies, tribal profiles, are really good insight to what tribes are doing, and maybe you can also do it in your community and whatnot. And also with that, if you have any questions, you can contact me by email, and I'd be happy to help you out. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate the invitation to present on this great webinar in company of Luann and Rachel, who are doing really amazing stuff. So we're very fortunate. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Excellent presentation, and once again, just an incredible amount of information here for our audience to look through and learn from. Now we're heading to our question and answer session, and we do have approximately a half hour. We certainly don't need to use it all, but if our audience has questions, please do submit your questions, and we'll likely have time to get to them. So with that, I'll get started here. Couple things. So first off, do you guys see, or are you expecting additional funding coming from the federal government to address these, to address climate change, climate mitigation, and adaptation? Is that something you're hearing coming?
This is Luann. I can respond. We are always hopeful, and the president's budget showed a nice increase for resilience, but we are always aware that Congress is the one that will make the appropriations. So we're hopeful. We don't yet know.
Thanks, Luann. How about mental health? This is, kind of an existential issue for people and tribes and their subsistence lifestyles in many cases. Are you seeing in the adaptation plans plans for how to address kind of mental health impacts of changing, ways of life, changing subsistence, that sort of things, and the impact on people's mental health as a result of that?
This is Nikki. I'll take a first comment on that. Yes, it's becoming more obvious that mental, spiritual, for us Indigenous people, we think of spiritual, mental health, and that well-being all in one package. And a lot of that is becoming, it's okay to, like they're saying, it's okay to put that in the adaptation plans or mitigation plans. And I think that is evident in when they include the voices of the elders, the community members, and you can read it and you can feel it in their words that they bring up. But also, you all have probably heard of Dr. Shasta Gan, who is the environmental director for the Palo Band of Mission Indians. They have been working heavily on this very issue that you brought up, James, and they're really trying to bring that to the forefront. I mean, Shasta talks a lot about psychosocial resilience and whatnot, and in terms of climate change impacts. We have to address it because our people are feeling it, the environment is feeling it. I want to share with you really quick one story from Alaska where this young man, I think he was about 75, who said, I'm here because I want to know what to do. I want to know what to do on the level of, writing a document and getting funding and also just getting the word out about what I'm feeling, what my people are feeling. He goes, I have insomnia. I've never had it. I've never had trouble sleeping, but because there's no longer ice breaking, I can't hear it at night. It is his lullaby to go to sleep. And now he stresses out about that because there's lack of sleep, and he's just stressed out about and concerned about the lack of ice crashing into each other in the river that runs by their house. And he goes, you don't see that anymore. I don't hear it anymore. And so that's just one example of what's going on. So yes, the answer is definitely yes. I'll see if Luann or Rachel want to comment on that. Thank you.
I think you said it well, Nikki. Yeah.
And I'll just mention, excuse me, we have a few resources acknowledging the mental health distress of climate change, but not as many as we will in the future, I hope. It's very obvious that it's becoming a bigger problem.
Great, thanks all. Most of these programs that we talked about today are planning oriented. Is there dollars for implementation of the plans, physical construction, that sort of thing, and where should people look for kind of the next steps after planning?
This is Luann. I'll just mention FEMA has a new project called BRIC, Building Resilience Infrastructure. I'm not sure what the acronym is for, but that is meant to move people from receiving money after a disaster to preparing ahead of time. And it's a pretty big program. I don't know exactly what money they have, but I understand that it will be for implementation of resilience.
Hi, this is Nikki. I want to add on to what Luann said. about the FEMA's program BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. It's a mouthful. It's hard. I have to always look it up too, but I have it written down today. But that's one thing. And I want to mention the ITEP, as Rachel did mention in one of her slides, that we're doing these advanced climate change cohort classes. They're primarily online, and with pre-COVID, we were doing one in-person meeting with all the tribal participants. And right now we're actually doing a cohort class that consists of, oh my God, it's a lot of people. A lot of tribes are really interested in this. I'm gonna say like more than 70 representatives, and we're working very closely with FEMA to train this cohort of tribes who are really interested in inserting climate change as a part of their tribal hazard mitigation plan. That's the title of our course, tribal hazard mitigation planning. And so that is one way. And one other way is that we are really encouraging tribes to look outside the box of federal funding, maybe look into foundations, private foundations, and through their partnerships to see if they can get some sort of funding within the tribe, but also with these non-tribal, non-federal foundations that may have this money. And what I personally have been I've been trying to do is also encourage some foundations to really consider funding tribal work, adaptation work. I've literally not done very much on it, but I'm really trying to make that a point in every time I talk about implementation funding, and that's a huge thing. And I just also want to mention that we also tell tribes, you have already been doing implementation. You just don't know that's one of the actions or strategies that you mentioned that you want to do as part of your plan. Something that you're already doing could be construed as part of your adaptation plan, and you can use that as part of the implementation part of your plan. And you have already been getting funding from that for that in some manner, and perhaps you can look to that funding source, whether it's within the tribe or outside of it. So that's what I want to say. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Rachel. I want to second what Nikki said. Climate change, obviously, I think we're all aware it's not an isolated issue. So there's funding besides, like the quote unquote climate change grants. Think about like where your current funding sources might be, and like how your programs might need to, how they might need to change, like how they function, like small things maybe that need to change, or probably some are probably big and do involve like earth moving. But we see in a lot of adaptation plans, a lot of the actual final strategies and actions, sometimes they're just about like monitoring a new parameter that they're concerned about. And our program actually, if it's related to a decision, we can fund like monitoring efforts as well. So like not all kind of climate change actions are going to be earth moving, some are going to be probably more monitoring. So think of where you get, your existing funds, and, include that within kind of those grants every year that you request. Like, we talked about emergency management, drought resilience, funding for invasive species, like, your ITEP for the environmental plan. That's more like on the planning side. But I think with that, I thought that some of the ITEPs could be used for, funding like monitoring efforts and things like that too. But I need to double check that. Forestry and wildfire funds, and like fuels mitigation funds, like those already exist, and those are probably going to be part of your plan. So, just remember that like there's lots of funds out there besides just straightforward climate change grants like our program. There's other funds. There's funds from, like I mentioned, forestry and wildfire management, drought, like all of these, many of these efforts could probably be used to help fund strategies within your adaptation plans. So So think about that too. You know, it's not all going to be like earth moving grants that, you know, FEMA or Army Corps of Engineers, you know, fund. A lot of them are might just affect like kind of how you monitor or like how things are zoned for protection. There's lots of different strategies, and they're not all kind of earth moving, you know. So just keep that in mind, that you can, in your adaptation plans, that you can identify ways to, you know, better manage like with the new risks that you've identified, and you know, think of how you can leverage the existing dollars you have for those programs to help with those changes that you've identified in your adaptation plan. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. We've talked a lot about planning, like I said before. Is there an opportunity for tribes to, as part of these adaptation plans, plan for renewable energy development and that sort of thing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and, you know, prevent the, or not prevent, but reduce the magnitude of climate change? And the follow-on to that, are tribes finding ways to leverage their status or share their perspective to help change the discussion on climate change at a global level, like the importance of it?
This is Nikki. Yes, definitely try. I think I'm answering your question correctly when I say that tribes are leaders. They're really using what they've been doing. My good friend, I like to call him my good friend, who has fabulous shoes, Celso Villegas from the Tana Atam Nation, is one of those leaders, and he says something that I always say is that tribes have been adapting. We just have to adapt even quicker now. And tribes are also saying we have been adapting to many things for a long time, and climate change is just another, you know, problem thrown in the mix that we really have to address and look to tribes who have been doing this. We live in these within the boundaries of reservations that don't really receive the same services due to many reasons that are an urban community like Flagstaff, Arizona. Just because I'm here, they receive, whether it's from the state or from the tribal government. You know, it's very different. But there's leaders like, again, Shasta Gone from the Palo Band of Mission Indians. They're doing something really amazing with their health database and their webinar trainings that they're doing focused on health. Confederated Salish Kootenai tribe leaders, the Swinomish tribe in the Northwest Washington, they also have been doing that. They actually have been talking about climate change before it was okay to talk about climate change and global warming on a level that they have been speaking about it on a level that other tribes or even other communities around the world and within the U.S. have been. Their tribal council has always been very supportive of addressing climate change before even my program was started. So definitely we should, again, you have been hearing this in the news lately that tribal people, indigenous people, are about 5% of the world, but yet we control or take care of, not control, almost 80% of the world's biodiversity. I believe that's right, but you know, that's I hope you get the point of what I'm saying. So yes, so I'll leave it to Luann or Rachel to respond to. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Rachel. Yeah, I want to acknowledge a potential funding source for tribes who are interested, at least from on the BIA side, in trying to further the renewable energy like feasibility studies. We have the energy in our energy and mineral development group. We have the division of the Division of Energy and Mineral Development, and they do have grants for tribes every year, focused on kind of feasibility studies. And a lot of times, those grants and the outcomes of those grants can then help tribes apply to DOE Office of Indian Energy grants to kind of further that development for renewable energy projects. So we do have that. That's outside of our program, but it's still under BIA. So if you're not aware of that, you can probably just Google BIA Division of Energy and Mineral Development and learn more about it there. There's definitely tribes interested in that. And on our side too, like we do see proposals every year from tribes who are interested in identifying also impacts of climate change on their existing infrastructure too, and how can you make a more resilient energy infrastructure. That's definitely something that we've seen in the past, and something that tribes are definitely interested in, and a lot of times something that renewable energies can help with, in terms of the more resilience. And there's a really cool story. Nikki, you probably remember it better, but with I think Blue Lake Rancheria being able to provide some of the energy during some of the blackouts because they had invested so much in solar units, solar energy for their neighbors, like in California, during some of the blackouts, I think because of the fires. So there's some really neat work going on in Indian country in that area. I know a lot of the tribes, I think, signed some, especially in the Northwest, I believe, signed on that they were really interested in staying in the Paris climate agreement several years ago. So tribes are definitely interested in the forefront of trying to support like global emissions reductions at their tribal nation level.
And I'll just add on to something Rachel said. Thank you. The Blue Lake Rancheria tribe, we historically didn't really consider mitigation opportunities as part of adaptation, but as things evolve, we are seeing more and more that that's exactly what it is. Blue Lake Rancheria was able to, through its adaptation, getting its own power, now is mitigating. And I think it's a sign of the times. People will keep moving in that direction.
Great. Thank you, Ann. And Jana Gagnon was on this webinar, and she just had to leave, but I'm sure she'll appreciate at Blue Lake Rancheria. Jana will appreciate the props that for the work that she and the Rancheria has done. Just a last question here, and maybe more will come in, but is there any kind of collaboration amongst tribes to wield greater weight or influence on global or national, federal, I should say, climate change policy?
This is Rachel. There is the National Congress of American Indians. I think it's the oldest tribally led, tribally focused advocacy and policy focused organization. And they do have a climate change working group, and they have like a newsletter, and so it's so that's probably, they're the one that I'm quite aware of. I know they've invited us to speak in the past at some of their sessions, but that does exist. Obviously, that's not on the federal side. That's the National Congress of American Indians, and they have that climate change program and or task force, the climate change task force that some folks on the call are probably part of. There are lots of regional tribal organizations as well that are very active, and I could start naming them, but I don't want to miss a region. So there are many regionally, and the big national one that comes to mind was NCAI that I wanted to mention. they have more information on their website. But again, they're not federal, so I'm not like speaking for them or anything like that. But just in terms of that question, I wanted to mention that.
This is Nikki. I want to add on to Rachel's comments. I just want to say, first of all, ITEP, we try the climate change program. We don't do policy recommendations or policy work of any, of that kind, but we do provide a lot of our knowledge because we work with tribes on a level that, that most people don't, meaning most people at the higher federal or state level. But yeah, we go to these communities and work with them, and we hear their stories and whatnot. So that is ITEP's one of ITEP's strengths. We were part of a tribal review of that 2020 Congressional Action Plan on the climate crisis. Came out, I believe, in 2020, yeah, last year. And so the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians did lead their climate change program, and they did a tribal review of that document, and I believe they made some recommendations, and so I will put that in the chat box, and if Monica can put it out there. So that's one thing that's happening, and that also included tribal members, but I think it included somebody from the National Congress of American Indians. So thank you.
Thanks, Nikki and Rachel. With that, we don't have any further questions. So I want to thank all of our presenters again for their time and the excellent presentations and resources shared today. In general, we are interested in suggestions on how to strengthen the value of our webinar series. So please do send us any feedback that you have on the series in general. And then on our final slide here, we have the remaining topics of our 2021 series. The next webinar is titled Energy's Role in Resilience Planning. It will be held on May 26th of obviously next month, and they're always scheduled at 11 a.m. time. Thank you again for your interest and attendance, and we look forward to you joining us again on future webinars. This concludes the webinar for today. Good day all.